Chapter 4. A small table had been set up inside the captain's quarters, upon which were various foods, including fruit, a loaf of dry bread, and some manner of roasted bird. It wasn't until I laid eyes on the food that I realized how empty my stomach was. My mouth watered at the sight, but I quickly swallowed and lifted my eyes up to the captain, who was seated in a wooden chair behind the desk. He certainly looked the part, if nothing else, sporting a short and sandy bush of a beard and a cocked hat, which served to flatten and hide the tangled mess of hair atop his head. He was an older man, with a face that had been hardened by years at sea and seen its fair share of battles. This I could tell from the faint outlines of scars that lined his features. Still, he had a pleasant smile for me when I entered, rising to offer me a meagre bow.
"Milady, pleased to make your acquaintance. Miss Williams, was it?"
I straightened myself, trying to muster as much dignity as possible, despite the obscene dress I was wearing. "Yes," I said, carefully. "And you're—"
"Captain Nicholas McFarley, at your service. And of course you've already met Grayson."
I glanced at Grayson, who had planted himself by the door. His eyes flicked towards me, but other than that he kept a stony, unreadable expression plastered across his face. I turned back to the captain, eyes snagging on the food for a moment, but I was quick to redirect my attention. Captain McFarley noticed the look and gestured to the table.
"I'm sure you're hungry. Please."
I longed to comply, but stayed where I was, eyeing the food uncertainly. Perhaps this was how they would get rid of me. Would I take a bite, only to find that the food had been laced with arsenic? As if to assuage my fears, the captain emerged from behind the desk and sat at the table before me, helping himself to a carving of the bird. With an anxious swallow, I took the seat across from him. Captain McFarley shot me a big, toothy smile before very deliberately scooping a generous serving of meat onto his fork and putting it into his mouth. Reassured, I began taking some food for my own plate. For a few moments, there was silence, apart from the clinking of the silverware as we ate. I was endeavouring to restrain myself, but it was difficult. I was unsure how long it had been since I had last eaten, and my brisk swim earlier had left me rather famished. Everything seemed to taste normal, and as I got some food into my stomach, my brain began working a bit more logically, leading me to decide that it didn't make much sense for them to try and poison me anyway. If they truly wanted me dead, I reasoned, I would not be sitting here now.
"So,"
Captain McFarley began, finally.
"Grayson filled me in on the mix-up."
His smile faded ever so slightly. Swallowing, I lifted my eyes to look at him, doing my best to banish all fear from my expression.
"This puts us in quite a difficult situation, as I'm sure you realise."
I nodded, with a shaky exhale. "I do."
"Well,"
his chair creaked softly as he leaned backwards in it.
"then I'm sure you also realise that by now, the attack on the... what was it?"
"The Oasis."
Grayson grunted from behind me. I jumped and had to stop myself from whirling to look at him. I had nearly forgotten he was there.
"Yes, the Oasis,"
Captain McFarley agreed.
"The attack has been reported in England, and your father is well aware of what has happened to ye. So, you might say we've reached the point of no return."
The appetite I'd discovered just a few minutes ago vanished almost instantly. I had suspected as much, but it was disheartening to hear it said out loud. Somehow, a part of me had still been hoping that I could be quietly dropped off at port, and we could pretend that none of this had ever happened. But that would have been too easy. Then I began, straining to keep my expression even. "What are you planning to do with me?" Captain McFarley spread his arms wide, giving me a grim smile.
That's the question. I can think of one or two solutions, but...
His eyes wandered behind me towards Grayson.
Grayson and I have both agreed that we'd rather not to do anything drastic. We have no desire to make your father any angrier than we've already made him.
Again, I resisted the urge to look back at Grayson and swallowed, closing my eyes for a brief moment as I processed this thinly veiled euphemism. I grasped for a good way to respond. "You're familiar with my father's reputation, then?" I asked, finally. At this, he let out a laugh.
Ain't a pirate alive without a healthy fear of Admiral Hangman, milady,
he said.
He's hung more than a few of my men who were stupid enough to get caught.
This was no surprise to me. My father was known to favour and give out promotions to any man who captured a pirate for the gallows, and if someone were to capture one of the pirates who had abducted his daughter, knowing him, he'd probably let that man marry me. Captain McFarley drummed his fingers against the table.
I had Grayson bring you in here because I thought some cooperation might be in everyone's best interests.
Now, with a mild confidence that they weren't interested in murdering me, I shifted and sat upright in my seat. "Cooperation," I repeated. Grayson appeared on my left, giving me another start.
You know your father better than us,
he said.
If we allowed you to pen a letter to him once we reached port, a letter which very delicately explained the situation and emphasized how well you've been treated, would he be willing to come to some kind of arrangement?
I blinked at him, and then at Captain McFarley. They both stared back at me expectantly. Grayson was presenting the idea as the solution, but my first instinct was to tell them that it would never work. I had no idea what I could possibly write that would convince him not to fire all cannons at the pirate's ship the moment it came into view. But my alternative was, well, drastic, as Captain McFarley had put it. With those words ringing in my head, I swallowed the refusal. Supposing I agree to this, I imagine I would not be kept bound to a post for the remainder of the voyage, I said carefully. I glanced pointedly at Grayson, who shifted his weight back and looked vaguely uncomfortable. Captain McFarley's mouth twitched into an amused smirk.
Apologies for that, milady. I promise that from here on out, you will be treated as a guest. You will be free to roam the ship as you please, so long as you're not in the way, and you will be kept well fed and provided for.
He leaned forward.
In return, however, you will write that letter when we reach port.
His tone was pleasant, but the flash in his eye spelled a clear warning for me. If I refused, they could just as easily slit my throat and toss me overboard, and then hope that my father never caught up with them. No, there was no real choice here. I was in too deep now, and there was nowhere to go but deeper. Swallowing, I nodded. You have yourselves in agreement, I said. Captain McFarley broke into a smile.
Well then, allow me to formally welcome you aboard the Libertas, milady.
He stood, moving behind the desk to grab a bottle of wine, which he brought back to the table. I cast a sidelong glance at Grayson, but he was lost enough in thought that he didn't seem to notice. The captain poured 2 glasses of the wine and offered one to me.
We'll see to it that sufficient quarters are provided for you. Grayson!
Snapping back to attention with a grunt, Grayson nodded and turned to leave the room. I accepted the glass the captain had handed to me and took a sip, more out of politeness than thirst. To my surprise, it was rich and flavourful, almost like something my father would have had served at dinner. It occurred to me suddenly that it had likely been stolen off the very ship from which I'd been abducted. Perhaps it was due to nerves or simply pure exhaustion, but this was somehow funny to me. I couldn't hold back a smile. It took a few moments before Grayson returned, and he jerked his head at me in a brusque indication to follow him. As I stood, Captain McFarley did as well, gracing me with another one of his halfway serious bows before I took my leave. Grayson said nothing as he led me down the hall, and it was impossible not to feel discomfited by the tension in the air. Compared to Captain McFarley, Grayson's expression was exceedingly difficult to read, and I honestly wasn't sure if he was altogether pleased with the arrangement, or if he would have rather trussed me up again and tossed me in some closet to keep me out of the way. I supposed it didn't much matter how he felt about it. As Captain McFarley had pointed out, they had few choices if they wanted my help in avoiding the wrath of my father. He led me back to the room he'd dumped me in earlier, where I had gotten changed. I noted with mild surprise that it was slightly cleaner than when I had first seen it, and the bed against the wall had been made.
You'll sleep in this cabin. These are my personal quarters. No one will bother you here.
I turned to look at him, throwing my brows up. Your quarters, I repeated. Then where will you sleep? Grayson shrugged.
I'll find an empty spot somewhere in the common area,
he grumbled. Abruptly, he turned to leave, but then stopped, as if remembering something.
Oh!
He faced me.
As the captain said, you're free to roam the ship, but if I may offer a suggestion...
His hands slipped into his pockets.
You should mind yourself. The only types of women the men on this ship see are hags and toothless prostitutes whenever we stop at ports. I'd wager that many of them have never seen a woman like you in their lives.
Grayson's eyes swept my figure, and it was hard not to shield myself from his discerning gaze.
If you do happen to fancy a walk, find me first and let me know.
I tried to keep my face steady, clenching my jaw, but the obvious look at the dress I was wearing made my skin flush red. "Are you trying to frighten me?" I asked sourly.
Not at all.
The corner of his mouth turned upwards, however, relishing my unease.
I just think we'd all feel a little better if you were chaperoned.
A flare of irritation rose in my chest at the suggestion. Grayson gave me a small smile and then a short bow, taking a step back towards the open doorway.
Enjoy your stay, Miss Williams.